The hook is untouched. The ending lands as before, and every beat survives. The cuts come from redundant phrasing and repeated asides. A shovel cracked against the side of a rusted metal door. Then again. Sparks jumped off the hinge and skittered across the wet concrete floor. A woman braced her boots against the ground and pulled. The panel groaned. It didn't budge. She wiped the sweat off her face and swung again, harder this time, and a chunk of corroded steel broke loose and clattered down into the dark. Cold air rushed out of the hole. It smelled like salt and old money. She leaned in with a flashlight and her hands started shaking. Behind that wall, sealed up for 30 years, sat crates nobody in that town knew existed. Her name was Delia Marsh. 3 months earlier, she'd spent her last dollar on the building everybody said was worthless. What she found behind the shark tank would silence every last laugh in Rockport, Maine. Stay with me on this one. 3 months before that door came loose, nobody in Rockport thought Delia Marsh had 2 dimes to rub together. And they weren't far off. She'd waited tables at the Gull's Nest for 11 years. She knew every regular by their coffee order. Then the owner sold the place to a restaurant chain. The chain brought in their own people, and just like that, Delia was standing in the gravel lot holding a cardboard box and a final paycheck that wouldn't cover 2 months of rent. She was 38. She had a 9-year-old daughter named Nora, and she had a decision to make. Now, most people in her shoes would have done the sensible thing. Find another waitressing job, keep the head down, save what you can and hope the winter's mild. Delia did not do the sensible thing, because down at the end of Harbor Road there was a building the whole town had written off years ago, the Blue Harbor Aquarium. It had been shuttered almost 30 years, ever since the man who built it walked out one night and never came back. His name was Elias Thorne, and once he'd been the richest man on that stretch of coast. Made his fortune in shipping and cold storage, then poured a chunk of it into this glass palace on the water so kids could press their faces to the tanks and watch the sharks glide by. For a few years it was the pride of the county. Then one autumn he vanished. No note, no body, just gone. The aquarium sat there rotting ever since, and every few years somebody talked about tearing it down, and nobody did. Delia had grown up walking past that building, and here's the thing about her. She never stopped looking at it. Not the way the rest of the town looked at it, which was to say they stopped seeing it at all. To them, it was just a shape on the water. Delia saw something else. She saw the bones of something good under all that rot. So when the county finally put it up for auction to settle 3 decades of back taxes, Delia took every cent she had left in the world, $41,000, money she'd scraped together nickel by nickel over 11 years of double shifts and skipped vacations, and she bought it. The building, the land, the cracked tanks, all of it. She signed the papers with a borrowed pen, and her hand didn't shake once. The town thought she'd lost her mind. And believe me, they made sure she knew it. Marian Alcott, who ran the hardware store, told her flat out she'd just thrown away her daughter's future on a pile of wet concrete. Said it right across the counter, loud enough for 2 other customers to hear. The men who drank coffee down at the marina started calling her the fish lady, and they didn't mean it kind. Somebody spray-painted good luck on the loading door, with a little laughing face next to it. Even the bank teller, when Delia closed out her savings, gave her that soft, pitying look people give you right before they decide you're a fool. But she showed up the next morning with a bucket and a wire brush, and she went to work. The main tanks were green with 30 years of algae and rot. The pumps were seized solid. Half the light fixtures had fallen out of the ceiling. She scrubbed anyway. She hauled out garbage bags by the 100, one at a time, to a rented dumpster she could barely afford. She learned plumbing off her phone at night after Nora went to sleep, then fixed a valve wrong the next day and flooded the floor ankle deep, and mopped it up, and fixed it again the right way. She learned wiring the same painful way. Little by little, the place started to breathe. A light came on here, A pump coughed and caught there. Some nights she sat on an overturned bucket in the dark and asked herself what on earth she thought she was doing, and she wasn't alone. About a week in, a fisherman found a young sea lion tangled in netting off the point, half-starved, one flipper torn up bad. The rescue center 2 hours south was full and told her so on the phone. So Delia took him. She set up a tank in the back, cleaned that flipper twice a day, fed him herring out of her own grocery money, and named him Biscuit because the first thing he ever did in her care was steal a biscuit off her lunch plate. Biscuit followed her everywhere after that. Honked at her like a rusty car horn every time she walked in the door. That sea lion became the only creature in Rockport who thought Delia Marsh knew exactly what she was doing. Some days he was the only reason she kept coming back. By the end of the 2nd month she was nearly broke again, running on fumes and a maxed-out credit card. The one thing between her and opening day was the big cracked shark tank in the main hall. 40,000 gallons. A hairline fracture down the back wall that leaked a slow, steady drip you could hear across the room. She couldn't fill it, couldn't sell a single ticket, until that crack was sealed, and a proper contractor wanted more than she had to her name twice over. So she did what she'd done with everything else. She drained the tank down to the bottom and climbed inside with a trowel and a bag of marine epoxy to patch it herself. That was the day everything changed. Because when Delia knelt down at the base of that back wall and tapped it to check the concrete, it didn't sound solid. It sounded hollow. She almost ignored it, that's the truth. She was tired, she was broke, and she had a wall to fix before her rented pump ran out of gas. But she tapped it again, moving her hand along the base, and the sound stayed wrong the whole width of that lower panel, and something in her gut wouldn't let it go. So she chipped at the surface with the edge of her trowel, and under a skin of poured concrete she found metal. A seam. A straight, machined line that didn't belong. She kept chipping, and the shape came clear. A rectangle of steel set flush into the wall, painted over so many times it had disappeared into the concrete around it. A maintenance panel sealed shut, the kind of thing you'd never notice unless you were down on your knees inside a drained shark tank tapping the wall like a crazy person. Delia went and got her tools. She spent 2 hours on that panel. The bolts were rusted into shapeless slag. She heated them with a little propane torch until they glowed. She pried them, she pounded them, she cracked 2 heads clean off. Then she wedged the blade of her shovel behind the edge and threw her whole weight against it, again and again, until her palms were raw through her gloves. And when the panel finally tore loose and cold air came rushing out of the dark behind it, she stood in the bottom of that tank with her flashlight shaking, and she did not understand what she was looking at. It wasn't a pipe access. It wasn't a pump housing. It was a room. A small concrete room sealed off from the world, built right into the foundation behind the shark tank. And it was full. Delia ducked through the hole and her light swept over stacked wooden crates, gray with age, furred with dust nobody had disturbed in 3 decades. She pried the lid off the nearest one, the nails shrieking as they came. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were bundles of paper. Old bank paper engraved, tied with faded ribbon gone soft with time. Bearer bonds, hundreds of them. She didn't know what she was holding, not yet, but she'd seen enough movies to know the word printed across the top, and the long string of zeros made her mouth go dry. The next crate held gold, not jewelry, bars. Small, heavy, dull yellow bars stamped with a maker's mark, laid in neat rows like bread cooling in a bakery case. She lifted one and nearly dropped it. And a third crate, this one a strong box, held a leather folder, and inside the folder were deeds. Property deeds. Land up and down the coast, a whole warehouse district in Portland. A stretch of waterfront Delia knew for a fact was worth a small fortune now that the city had grown out toward it. Elias Thorne hadn't run off broke and beaten the way the story always said. Thorne had built himself a vault behind his own shark tank, filled it with everything he owned that could be carried, sealed it up behind 40,000 gallons of water, and then, for reasons no living soul could explain, walked away from it and never told a single person on earth it was there. Delia sat down on an overturned crate in that cold little room and just breathed. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She thought about Nora asleep at the sitters. She thought about the credit card and the shut-off notice magneted to the fridge and the 11 years of double shifts, and she started to laugh, quiet at first and then not quiet, and then she started to cry, and she couldn't have told you which was which by the end. She did the only thing that made sense to her that night. She told no one. She climbed back out through the hole, propped the panel loosely over it, threw a tarp over the whole back wall and drove home with a single gold bar sitting in her coat pocket like a stone. She picked up Nora. She made her dinner. Grilled cheese cut on the diagonal the way the kid liked it. She tucked her in and read her half a chapter, and then she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold, and for the first time in 3 months, Delia Marsh felt her shoulders come down from around her ears. It was going to be all right. Whatever this was, her problems were over. She had time to think. Nobody knew. She'd figure it out quietly, one careful step at a time, the way she'd figured out everything her whole life. She turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, and she slept better than she had in years. She should not have slept at all. The knock came at 7 the next morning, not a neighbor's knock. 3 hard, flat raps, evenly spaced, the kind of knock that already knows the answer to the question it's asking. Delia opened the door in her robe with her coffee half made, and there was a man on her step in a gray suit, holding a leather briefcase, and behind him at the curb sat a black car with the engine still running. He smiled at her the way a lawyer smiles. "Miss Marsh," he said, "my name is Garrett Vane. I think we should talk about what you found in that building." And just like that, everything Delia thought was overturned into something else entirely. Because here's what she didn't know. The night she pried that panel loose, she'd been sure she was alone. She hadn't been. A man named Cole Prout had been fixing crab traps on the pier 200 feet away in the dark, and he'd seen her flashlight flaring and swinging inside a drain tank at 11 at night, and Cole Prout talked. He talked over coffee the next morning. He talked to the men at the marina, and one of them made a phone call, because for 2 years a development company had been quietly trying to buy up the whole Harbor Road waterfront, parcel by parcel, and the one piece they couldn't get, the one that had slipped through their fingers to some waitress for $41,000, was the Blue Harbor Aquarium. Garrett Vane worked for that company. And Vane had spent a long, well-paid career making inconvenient people disappear from deals legally on paper, with a smile and a handshake and a check. He didn't threaten her. Not that morning. That's what made it so frightening. He sat down at her kitchen table, uninvited, moving Nora's cereal bowl aside to make room, and he opened his briefcase and laid out documents in a neat fan. He told her Elias Thorne had died intestate, that the estate had never been fully settled, that any assets discovered on that property were subject to a probate claim his firm represented on behalf of Thorne's surviving relatives. He told her the bearer bonds might be part of that estate. He told her the deeds almost certainly were. And he told her gently, sadly, like a man reading out a forecast full of storms, that she was about to be buried in litigation so deep it would take the rest of her natural life and every cent she'd ever earn, and that the smart thing, the kind thing, the thing a good mother would do for her little girl, was to sign the property and its contents over to his clients right now for a clean $200,000 and walk away free and clear. $200,000. For something worth $415 million. He slid the number across the table on a check already made out in her name, spelled right and everything, and he capped his pen and set it down beside it. You see what happened there. This wasn't the town laughing at the fish lady anymore. This wasn't Marion Alcott saying she'd wasted her savings across a hardware counter. This was a man with a running car and a briefcase full of paper telling a single mother in her own kitchen that the law itself was standing on his side of the room. It had stopped being about pride and started being about whether Delia Marsh and her daughter would end up with nothing, or worse than nothing, buried under legal bills for the rest of their lives. And she felt it. She felt the floor tilt under her feet. She felt how easy it would be, how reasonable to pick up that pen. But she didn't sign. Something in her, the same something that had made her tap that wall a second time when she was tired and ready to quit, made her keep her hand flat on the table. "I need to think," she said. Vane's smile never moved. He told her the offer was good for 48 hours. Exactly. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and left the pen and the check lying on her kitchen table like a dare. If you've ever watched somebody try to take what a good person earned, and you wanted with your whole heart to see them fail, stay with me, because this is where it turns. Do me a favor real quick. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button, because the next part is the whole reason I wanted to tell you this story. The moment Vane's car pulled away, Delia's phone started ringing and it did not stop. The word was out. In a town that size, a secret lasts about as long as ice in July. By noon there were cars parked up and down both sides of Harbor Road and a crowd at the aquarium's front gate. And these were the faces she knew. Marion Alcott, who told her she was throwing away her daughter's future. The men from the marina who'd called her the fish lady. The bank teller who'd given her the pity look. All of them standing at her gate in the afternoon sun, and now their faces were doing something new. Now they were smiling at her. They came with casseroles wrapped in foil. They came with old friendships suddenly and warmly remembered. Marion Alcott hugged her right there at the gate and called her honey, and mentioned, just in passing, that the hardware store had fallen on hard times, and wouldn't it be something if an old friend could see her way to helping out? A man Delia had gone to high school with, hadn't spoken to in 20 years, showed up claiming his grandfather had lent Elias Thorne money back in the 60s and never been paid, so really, a piece of that vault was rightfully his. A cousin she hadn't heard from in 15 years drove all the way up from Portland with her husband. The same people who had laughed and pitied and painted a mocking face on her loading door were now lined up at her gate, palms up, every single one with a reason ready why they deserved a slice. And this is the part that tells you who Delia Marsh really was. Because she was tired and she was scared, and a person like that, standing on top of $415 million with lawyers already circling, could be forgiven for slamming that gate and telling the whole town where to go. She didn't. But she didn't start handing out checks either. She stood at that gate with Biscuit honking at her feet, and she looked out at all those familiar, hungry faces she'd known her whole life, and she said the same thing to every one of them. "Come back in 1 week. Come to the reopening. I'll have an answer for everybody." Then she closed the gate, latched it, and went inside and made 2 phone calls of her own. The first was to a lawyer, not a Garrett Vane kind of lawyer. A tired, honest old man named C. Perlman who'd handled her divorce years back for almost nothing because he'd known her mother and liked her. She told him everything in one long rush. And C., God bless him, was quiet a moment and then said 4 words that changed the whole game. "Bearer bonds," he said. "Read the name." Because here is a thing Garrett Vane had been counting hard on Delia not knowing. A bearer bond belongs to whoever holds it. That is the entire point of it. No name on the account, no registration, no listed heir, no bank record tying it to a soul. Whoever physically has the paper in his hand owns the money. Elias Thorne had chosen bearer bonds on purpose, precisely because they belonged to no estate, no bank, no relative, no court. They belonged to the hand that held them. And the hand that held them now was Delia's. But the deeds were another matter, and so was the gold, and Vane knew it, and Vane had 2 days of momentum and a probate claim that could freeze everything in ice for a decade. So C told her the second thing, and this one mattered even more. "Don't fight him in court," he said. "You'll lose on time even if you win on the law. He's got money and patience, and you've got neither. Fight him in the daylight instead. Bring the whole thing out into the open where he can't work in the shadows." And that gave Delia her idea. The second call she made was to the County Historical Society, and then to a reporter she knew a little from the Portland paper, and then to the dusty offices that still nominally handled Elias Thorne's estate. Because Delia had gone back into that vault, alone at midnight, with a better flashlight and a steadier hand, and she had opened the last crate, the small one shoved into the very back corner, the one she hadn't been able to make herself look at the first night. And inside it, under a last layer of gold, wrapped in the same brittle oilcloth as everything else, she had found a letter, in Elias Thorne's own hand, dated the night he disappeared. The letter was a confession, and a will, and an apology all at once. Thorne wrote that his own partners, the very men who had built the shipping company shoulder to shoulder with him, had been quietly planning to force him out and seize everything he owned. He wrote that he could not stop them, that the law was in their pockets, that the judges knew them by their first names. He wrote that the only way to keep his life's work out of their hands was to hide it, seal it away, and vanish, so they could not touch a single dime no matter how many lawyers they hired. He had meant to come back for it when it was safe. But he wrote that if he never did, then whoever found this vault, whoever had loved this building enough to dig down into its very bones, was the person he wanted to have all of it. "To the one who saves this place," he wrote, in a careful, old-fashioned hand, "I leave everything within these walls, freely and without condition." It was always meant for someone who could see what it was worth when no one else would. He signed it, and he had it witnessed and notarized that same day by the town doctor, whose signature and ink seal sat right there at the bottom of the page. It was a legally executed will. It named no relatives. It gave everything to whoever revived the aquarium. And that person, 30 years later, was Delia Marsh. Garrett Vane's entire claim, his surviving relatives, his probate freeze, the whole towering structure of it, was built on one single assumption, that Thorne had died without ever leaving his wishes behind. He had not counted on the fact that the man had left his wishes sealed in a crate behind his own shark tank, notarized and witnessed, waiting 30 patient years for exactly the kind of stubborn, wall-tapping soul who would actually get down on her knees and find them. Reopening day came that Saturday. Delia had spent the whole week finishing the shark tank at last, sealing the crack for real, filling all 40,000 gallons, getting the animals settled. She'd sold a portion of the gold, quietly and legally, through a proper dealer she found her, and used a piece of what it brought to make good on every honest debt the old aquarium had left scattered around that town over the years. The rest she'd put somewhere nobody could reach. And she'd told C. Perlman to make sure Garrett Vane got a personal invitation. She wanted him there. She wanted him in the room. The town turned out in force. It felt like a festival on Harbor Road, banners strung between the light poles, a cotton candy cart, kids running everywhere, half of Rockport crowded into the main hall around the big shark tank. The water was clear and blue now, lit from above, the sharks gliding past the glass slow and easy the way they had 30 years before. Biscuit had his own tank near the entrance, and he was showing off shamelessly. And Nora stood right beside her mother in a brand new dress, chin up, watching the door. Garrett Vane arrived in the same gray suit, briefcase in hand, that same lawyer's smile loaded and ready. He worked his way through the crowd to the front, and when the noise settled and people turned, he spoke first, pitching his voice loud enough to carry to the back of the hall. He said he was terribly sorry to spoil such a lovely celebration, but he said the assets discovered on this property were the subject of an active legal claim, and that Miss Marsh had no right to sell, to transfer, or to spend so much as $1 of any of it. He said it kindly. He said it with sympathy dripping off every word. And you could feel the whole room turn on a dime, feel the doubt come flooding back, feel all those neighbors start to wonder, quietly, whether the fish lady really had bitten off more than she could hope to chew. Delia let him finish. She let him get all the way to the end of it. Then she stepped up beside the shark tank, took out a single folded sheet of paper, and read it out loud to the whole town. She read Elias Thorne's will. She read the part where he explained, in his own words, how men in expensive suits had once tried to take everything he'd built with his 2 hands, and how he'd beaten them in the end by making sure his real and final wishes were written down and witnessed, and hidden where only a true believer would ever think to look. She read the part where he left everything to whoever saved this place. Her voice didn't shake once. And then she folded the paper, and she looked straight at Garrett Vane across the quiet hall, and she said, "Mr. Vane, 30 years ago, a man exactly like you tried to take all of this away from Elias Thorne. He wrote it down so it could never happen again. There are no surviving relatives with any claim. There is just this letter and this building and me. See." And old C. Perlman stepped forward out of the crowd, slow and rumpled and smiling, with the notarized original in a plastic sleeve, the town doctor's seal, and a certified copy already stamped and filed with the county clerk that very morning before 9. He handed Vane a document folder of his own. "That there's a cease and desist," she said, pleasant as could be. "And a formal notice that we've reported your firm's little attempt to coerce a signature under fraudulent representation of estate law. The Bar Association's copy went out in the same mail. The paper's on your side of the room now, son." Vane's smile came apart right there in front of everyone. It just slid off his face. He looked down at the will and at the certified copy, and out at the crowd of people he'd been so sure would side with money the moment things got hard, and he understood, in about 4 seconds flat, that there was nothing left in the whole room to fight. His entire play had depended on Delia not knowing what she really had, and on her not having the nerve to drag it into the light. She'd done both. He closed his briefcase with a quiet click, and he turned, and he walked out through a hall packed with the very people he'd counted on, and not one person said a word as he passed. The black car pulled away from Harbor Road for the last time, and nobody watched it go. Nobody laughed at Delia Marsh after that. But here's the thing, and it's the part I most wanted you to hear, so stay with me one more minute. She didn't gloat either. When Vane was gone and the hall was buzzing again and the whole town was looking at her like she was a completely different person than the fool they'd pitied a week before, Delia climbed up onto the low wall beside the shark tank, with Biscuit honking away at her feet, and she told them all the truth. She'd made her decision, and it wasn't the one anybody expected. She was keeping the aquarium. That much was hers and always would be. But the fortune, the deeds, the bonds, the gold, all of it, she was putting most of it into a foundation, a marine center for the whole coast, free admission for every kid in the county forever, no exceptions, a real rescue program for animals like Biscuit with a proper vet and proper tanks, jobs, real jobs with real paychecks for the people of a town that had been dying by slow inches for 30 years. The men who'd called her the fish lady would build it. Marion Alcott, who told her she was throwing her daughter's future away, would run the gift shop. The bank teller who'd given her the pity look would keep the foundation's books. Nobody got a handout, not one, but everybody got a place and a purpose and a reason to be proud of that building again. Elias Thorne had built a glass palace so kids could press their faces to the tanks. Delia Marsh was going to make sure they still could, 100 years after both of them were long gone. I wish you could have seen the room when she said it. Grown men from the marina wiping their eyes and pretending hard it was just the salt air. Marion Alcott standing there with one hand pressed over her mouth. And little Nora, 9 years old, holding her mother's hand and looking up at her like she'd always known, like there had never been a single day of doubt in that little girl's whole life. And maybe there hadn't been. Kids see clearer than we do. They see the thing itself before the world teaches them to see the price of it. The Blue Harbor Aquarium has been open for a good while now. If you ever drive up the coast to Rockport on a summer morning, you'll find the parking lot full and a line at the door, and the sound of children laughing bouncing off the water. There's a sea lion out back who's gotten fat and lazy and spoiled rotten, and still honks like a rusty car horn every single time a certain woman walks in. And on the wall right by the front entrance, framed under glass, there's a letter in an old man's careful handwriting, and mounted next to it on a little bracket there's a shovel. The same shovel, and under it a small brass plaque that reads, "For everyone who was told it was worthless." Delia never did cash that $200,000 check. She kept it, though. She had it framed, too, and hung it on the wall of her office, right where she'd see it every single day. Not because of the money, because of what it almost bought and what she almost sold, and how close a good person can come to trading away everything they are for a little bit of safety in one scary moment. She left the pen lying across the glass. She says it reminds her that the most important thing she ever did in her whole life was set that pen down and say 4 small words: "I need to think." You remember how this started. A woman alone at night, swinging a shovel at a rusted door, hands shaking, not understanding what she was looking at. Everybody in that town had walked past that wall for 30 years. Everybody saw a worthless building at the end of a road. She saw the bones of something good, and she was the only one who ever got down on her knees and tapped it a second time. That's the whole story, really. The fortune was just the part that made people pay attention. The real thing was already true the day she bought a ruin nobody wanted with the last dollar she had and picked up a wire brush and started to scrub. Some people wait their whole lives for the world to hand them something. And some people pick up a brush and go to work on the very thing everyone else gave up on. I know which kind I'd want standing beside me, and I think, by now, you do too.